Hello, you're welcome to our lecture. We're going to cover bones today. Bones. All right. The human skeleton is initially made of cartilages and fibrous membranes. So when a child is developing, those early stages of development, the skeleton or the skeletal structure is supported by cartilages and fibrous membranes. As the development proceeds, this is replaced by bone. So the support of the developing structure is replaced by bone as the development proceeds. Now, not all of the bone material is replaced. Rather, not all of the cartilage material is replaced. So some cartilage persists. So some of the cartilage actually persists. Why do we need some of the cartilage to persist? The cartilage that persists is used for flexibility in the body eventually. The cartilage that persists is used for flexibility in the body eventually. Now, cartilage is a connective tissue. Cartilage. So cartilage is a connective tissue. This connective tissue, it is unmineralized, and because it is unmineralized, it is soft. So cartilage is a connective tissue. We cover that when you do histology, and the reason why it is a connective tissue, it is unmineralized, and because it is unmineralized, it is actually a soft tissue. There are three types of cartilages in the human body. Three cartilage types. There are three types of cartilages in the human body. We have hyaline cartilage, we have elastic cartilage, and we have fibrocartilage. Hyaline cartilage, elastic cartilage, and fibrocartilage. These are the three types of cartilages we find in the human body. Now, the hyaline cartilage, this is the most abundant. It's the most abundant cartilage in the human body. And you'll find it in articular regions. Articular regions. Articular, we use the word articular here to represent joints. So in other words, parts of the body where flexibility is required, or specifically where two or more bones meet, articular areas. Now, but we will also find it in the costal areas, somewhere around the chest here where you have the sternum, and then we also find it around the respiratory system. So hyaline cartilage, most abundant, found in the articular regions, around the costal region as well, and in the respiratory tract. The next one is elastic cartilage. Now, it is more flexible than the hyaline cartilage, HC. So elastic cartilage is more flexible than the hyaline cartilage. You commonly find elastic cartilage in an external ear. Now, to know that a structure is elastic is if you stretch it and you let go, it will resume its normal size. If it resumes its normal size, then it is elastic. Number 3, fibrocartilage. So the third one, which is fibrocartilage, fibrocartilage is found in pressure areas in the body. Pressure areas. And also stretch areas. So there are 2 places in the body where you find fibrocartilage: pressure areas and stretch areas. Now, an example of where you find fibrocartilage will be your knee joint. And the intervertebral disc. So an example of where you find fibrocartilage will be a knee joint and the intervertebral disc. Now that I'm standing, the weight of my body is carried by the joint in my knee. So that makes that a pressure area. When you're sitting down, the weight of your body is supported by a vertebral column. So at that point, the bones that makes up the vertebral column, they bear that pressure. So between those bones that makes up the vertebral column, you have fibrocartilage there. So over here, if you have this, you have this. So let's say these are the bones that makes up their vertebral column. Somewhere in between here, in between these bones, you're going to have fibrocartilage. You have fibrocartilage right in there. But technically, when we find fibrocartilage between vertebrae, so this is a vertebra. The vertebra. If we find fibrocartilage between vertebrae is plural, then they will be called intervertebral disc. They're called intervertebral disc. You probably see that in the lab. They are shaped like a small disc, something like that. That's the way they are actually shaped. All right. Now, let's look at the cell types that are found in cartilages. Cell types in cartilages. Chondrocytes or chondroblasts. Chondroblasts. Now, chondroblasts, they are the immature types of cells that you find. They are the original so chondroblasts are the original or immature types of cells that you find in cartilages. These immature cell types, they will mature or develop to the mature types of cells that are called the chondrocytes. So the chondroblasts are the immature cell types that you find in cartilage tissue. Then they will mature or develop into chondrocytes. So these are the mature cells, these are the immature cells. These chondrocytes, what is their function? So while the chondroblasts, they make the chondrocytes, of what importance are chondrocytes in a cartilage tissue? They produce the matrix and the ground substance. They produce the matrix and the ground substance. They produce the matrix and the ground substance that contains the fibers. So remember, if you go back to your study of the tissues, which is histology, all connective tissues have fibers. They all have fibers in them. The fibers are contained in the ground substance. That ground substance is made by the chondrocytes. Right. Next, let's look at bones now. So we are done with cartilages. So as a recap, cartilages, they are found in a part of the body where flexibility is required. Cartilages, they are soft because they are unmineralized, and there are three types of cartilages: elastic cartilage, fibrocartilage, and hyaline cartilages. Bones. So let's look at bones. So how can we classify bones? How can we classify bones? Bone classification. So we have axial skeleton, so every bone in the human body is either an axial skeleton bone or is an appendicular skeleton bone. There's no exception to this. Now, the bones of the axial skeleton, they can be subdivided into bones of the skull, rib cage, and vertebral column. The bones of the axial skeleton, they are divided into two groups: skull, rib cage, and vertebral column. How about the bones of the appendicular skeleton? The appendicular skeleton is attached. It's attached to the axial skeleton. Upper limbs, lower limbs, and the girdles. So the bones of the appendicular skeleton, they can be grouped as bones of the upper limbs, bones of the lower limbs, and bones of the girdles. Now, my upper limbs, all of this is my upper limb. All of this is my upper limb. All of this is my upper limb. Then from my waist downwards to my toes, all of those are my lower limbs. So lower limbs from the waist right down, upper limbs from my shoulder right to my fingertips. Those are the upper limbs. Now, the upper limbs and the lower limbs, they connect to the axial skeleton indirectly. They use girdles. We'll talk about that when we do the skeleton. They use girdles. So we have girdles of the upper limbs and we have girdles of the lower limbs. So girdles are the connecting bones that connect either the upper limbs and the lower limbs to the axial skeleton. Next, we'll look at shapes of bones, bone shapes. Bone shapes. Long bone, short bone, flat bone, sesamoid bone, and irregular bone. So from a shape perspective, every bone that we have in our body can be classified as a long bone, a short bone, a flat bone, a sesamoid bone, or an irregular bone. There's no exception to that. Now, so how would you recognize a long bone? Again, you have some diagrams there that you have in your notes. A long bone is going to be longer than it is wide. It's going to have two expanded ends. It's going to have a shaft somewhere in the middle. It's going to have a shaft somewhere in the middle. So if I had to make a brief sketch of that, is you will see something like this. This will be a long bone. So it is longer than it is wide. It has two expanded ends, and it's going to have a shaft somewhere right in here. So if you see this, we know that this is a long bone. Where will you find long bones in the human body? Upper and lower limbs. So upper and lower limbs. You find long bones in the upper and lower limbs. You will talk a little bit more about that when we do the skeletal system. Short bones. Short bones, they are cube shaped. Cube shape. They are cube shaped. And if you look at the cube shaped structure or organ in the human body, it is not exactly like a mathematical cube. It's going to be more something like that. Something like that. That will qualify as a cube shape. Now, where will you find, so these bones there, they have all of their sides are equally the same. Where will you find short bones in the human body? You have carpals and tarsals. Carpals are wrist bones, your wrist bones. Tarsals are your ankle bones. Tarsals, ankle bones. Carpals, wrist bones. So this is where we find short bones in the human body. Flat bones. Flat bones. So they are flat, they are thin, they are curved. Flat, thin, and curved. This is the way to recognize a flat bone. It is flat, it is thin, and it is curved. Where will you find flat bones in the human body? You can find them, they are bones, or they make up bones of the skull. Most of the skull is made up of flat bones, bones of the skull. You can also find them around your sternum. Sternum is right here in the middle of your chest. And then you can also find them in the coxae. Coxae are hip bones. Coxae are hip bones. Then we also have, other example is going to be the scapulae. Scapulae. The scapulae are your shoulder blade. The bones you have some over here, or the scapula. Plural will be scapulae. Then we'll go down to sesamoid bones. So one more time, flat bones. They are flat, they are thin, they are curved. That we find in the skull, sternum, coxae, and scapulae. Remember the coxae, those are your hip bones. The sternum is found right here, middle of your chest. The scapulae, they are what you commonly call the shoulder blade. Sesamoid bones. Sesamoid bones. Now they are normally found, these are bones that are found between, a tendon and a muscle. These are bones that are found, between a tendon and a muscle. Their shape, triangular. They have a triangular shape. So if you're looking at one, it's going to have a shape roughly like that, or roughly like this. That's what you're going to see. These are called sesamoid bones. So where do we have sesamoid bones in our bodies? Patella, which is commonly called the kneecap. the patella, commonly called the kneecap. Then we also have the first metacarpals, first metacarpals. The carpals are the bones of your hands. The carpals are the bones of your hands. So the first bones of your hands, again, you cover this one, we'll do the skeletal system. So we have the first metacarpals and the second metacarpals. Second metacarpals. Good. Now the last shape is irregular. Irregular bones. Irregular bones. Irregular bones. Now, their shape is unlike the others described. So their shape is unlike the others described. That's why they are called irregular. So they have a shape which is not similar to any of the ones that have been described. That's why they are called irregular. A very good example of an irregular bone in the body will be a vertebra. The bones that are found, the backbones found in the vertebral column, are vertebra. Vertebra is singular. If you add an E here, it becomes vertebrae, plural, a vertebra. So if you look at our vertebral column, you have this. So the vertebral column is made up of a series of vertebrae that are combined together to make the vertebral column. So a vertebra is an example of an irregular bone. If you look at a diagram of a vertebra, you will see it will have a spinous process, transverse processes. They're going to have two transverse processes, and then it's going to have a centrum and a body. So you're going to have you have to recognize a vertebra, which is an example of an irregular bone. It's going to have a spinous process, transverse processes, two transverse processes, a centrum, and the body. Again, you can check your notes or your textbook for a diagram of a vertebra. All right. The next thing we want to look at is functions of bones. Functions of bones. Bone functions. Number 1, supports. So bones are supportive and protective. Number 2, storage. So what is stored in bones? What is stored in bones? We have calcium ions. We have phosphates, and we have lipids. Calcium ions, phosphate, and lipids. They are stored in bones. The bones also, they house the hematopoietic tissue. They house the hematopoietic tissue. The hematopoietic tissue makes blood cells. So in other words, blood cells are made in the bone. Blood cells are made in the bone. They are made by a tissue in the bone that is called hematopoietic tissue. So that's one of the functions of bones. All right, before I wipe this, they support and they are supportive and they are protective. One, so they support. When you sit down, you are supported by your bones. When you're standing, as I'm standing, I'm supported by my bones. Protection. So we have a skull. It protects our brain. We have a bony thorax. It protects the heart and the lungs that are in there. Then we talk of storage and then the formation of blood cells. So these are three main functions of the bones in the human body. All right, let's look at bone markings. Bone markings. Well, so now we are now moving to the gross anatomy of bones. Let's look at the gross anatomy of bones. We'll start with bone markings. Bone markings. So if you look at a bone, I put a diagram earlier on. So this is a rough diagram of a bone. If you see here, so this portion here, this is a projection. This is a depression. And these are openings. That's an opening. So if you look at a long bone externally, you want to see a projection, an opening, and a depression. So these are external bone markings. We can see this on the surfaces of bones. What is the function of a projection in a bone? Why do we need projections? Why do we need projections in bones? Number one, they are used as attachment sites. So projections are used as attachment sites. Attachment sites for what? One, muscles. Two, tendons. Three, ligaments. All of those are structures that are associated with joints. All of these are structures associated with joints. So these are the functions. So the projections, they function principally as attachment sites for muscles, for tendons, and for ligaments. Next is the depressions. Depressions, what are they used for? They are used as joint surfaces. They are used as joint surfaces. So if this bone has to, now a joint is where two or more bones meet. A joint is where two or more bones meet. So if this bone has to meet with another bone to form a joint, it is this depression is going to use. So depressions are used as joint surfaces. If bones do not have depressions, then joints, then it means that our body will not be able to form joints. And if our body is not able to form joints, then will not be flexible. Next, openings. Openings. So these are cavities that you find on the surface of joints. These are cavities you find on the surface of joints. So why do we have these cavities? They serve as passageways for blood and nerves. So openings in bones, why do we have them? They serve as passageways. Passageways for what? Blood and nerves. Right? We are still under gross anatomy of bones. We are just done looking at bone markings. So there are three main bone markings: projections, openings, and depressions. Depressions are used for making joints. Projections are used for attachment, and openings are used as passageway for blood vessels and nerve cells. Next, let's look at bone texture. Bone texture. I'll put a diagram on the board here to explain that. So this here, I have that. Have this. So this is a cross section of a long bone cut horizontally. Cross section of a long bone cut horizontally. Now this is rough. I think you have a better diagram in the notes provided and in the textbook. Right. So over here, so this will be the periosteum. Periosteum. In here, this will be the endosteum. Now, one of these will be called the trabecular. So one of these cavities will be called the trabecular. Plural will be trabeculae. So from here to here, all of this portion here, this will be called the spongy bone. You see that it has those cavities in there. Then inside each of these trabecula, we have the hematopoietic tissue. We have the hematopoietic tissue. Remember, we had said that the hematopoietic tissue is the tissue that is used for blood cell formation. So they are contained inside bone, and specifically in the trabeculae of bone, in the spongy area of the bone. Now here, this is compact bone here, compact bone. So as we have spongy bone inside, we'll have compact bone outside, compact bone. Now compact bone, it is smooth, solid. It is smooth, solid, and hard. So compact bone is smooth, solid, and hard. Or you can say hard, or you might use the word hard, or okay, let's leave it as hard. So compact bone is smooth, solid, and hard. So if you took a bone, so let's say this is your bone over here. It's a bone over here, and then you did a cross-sectional cut, and you're looking at the bone now from the top down. This is what you're actually going to see. So this actually reveals the structure of a long bone. Right, now I'm going to wipe this, and we're going to look at the structure, the external structure of a long bone. So this one is a cross section. This is a cross section. We're going to look at now the external structure of a long bone. So external structure, external anatomy of a long bone. We're looking at the external anatomy of a long bone. So we have this. Right, that's one end. This is the other end. So we'll have from here to here. That's one portion. We have from here to here is another portion. And then, okay, sorry, we'll have to put this one down. Right, so far so good. So we have that proximal epiphysis over here. This is the from here to here up to this point right here. This is called the distal epiphysis. This portion here, this is called the proximal epiphysis. This portion here is called the metaphysis. We have another metaphysis down here. So before this, here. So this is another metaphysis over here. Metaphysis. And this portion right here, which is inside the proximal physis, this is called the growth zone or the epiphyseal plate. When the bone is growing, this is where the growth actually takes place. Then we're going to have a shaft right in here, shaft with marrow. Right in here, we're going to have a shaft with marrow. We'll have a shaft with marrow. So essentially, this is how the external anatomy of the bone actually looks like. Both ends are called epiphyses. The end that is closer to the body would be called proximal epiphysis. The end that is further removed away from the main trunk will be called distal epiphysis. And you can see here that we have a growth zone only on the end, which is only on the proximal end. So a bone does not grow longer from both ends. It grows longer from one end only. And that's going to be from the proximal epiphysis. Now the portion of the bone between the metaphysis, this is a metaphysis. This portion is called the metaphysis, and the metaphysis right here. So the portion between the two metaphyses is called the diaphysis. Okay, I've not labeled that. This is called the diaphysis. Diaphysis. So one more time, metaphysis, we have it on both sides. We have the distal epiphysis, which is inferior. We have the proximal epiphysis, which is superior. And then within the proximal epiphysis, we have the growth zone or the epiphyseal plate. This is where growth of the bone takes place. We'll talk about that. And then somewhere right in the middle here, we have the shaft, which is a cavity, and then it contains the bone marrow. All right. Now we are done with looking at the external anatomy of the gross anatomy of bones. Let's say something about the microscopic anatomy of bones. So if we're given a slide or you are looking at a diagram of the microscopic structure of a bone, what is it that you're actually going to see? So we're moving away now from the gross anatomy to microscopic anatomy. I'll just put a sketch here. You have better diagrams in your textbook and the notes that we provided. So let's say you're looking at this under the microscope. Then you will see right? So if you're looking at the diagram of the microscopic structure of a of a bone under the microscope, you are surely going to see structures like this. Now, each of this one is called an osteon. It's called an osteon. So the osteons, the plural is ostia. They are the building blocks of bones. So that means a bone is a collection of ostia. A bone is a collection of ostia. So if you're looking at the microscopic structure of a bone, this is what you're going to see. You're going to see one there, you're going to see one, another one right over here. So these are called, one is called an osteon. Plural is ostia. Then somewhere right in the middle here, you're going to see the central canal. Central canal. You're going to see the central canal. The central canal is used as a passageway, passage for blood vessels and nerves. The central canal is used as a passageway for blood vessels and nerves. Then you can see that just surrounding the central canal, we have these rings. They are called concentric rings. Concentric means that they start from the inside and they move outwards. So we have these rings. These rings, the specific name for these rings, they are called, these are the lamellae. One is called lamella. Lamella. And this the lamella, they are connected. So this is one lamella over here. So you can see that they are connected by a structure called the canaliculus for plural, singular. So we have these concentric rings around. One of them is called a lamella. The lamella, they are connected with each other by a structure called the canaliculus. Canaliculus. Now, if you look at a good diagram, either in your notes or in your textbook, you will see that these concentric rings over here, they all have some structures around them. So each of these, one of these structures is called a lacuna, and the lacuna contains osteocytes. And a lacuna contains osteocytes. Osteocytes are the mature cells of a bone. So on the lamella is found lacunae, and the lacunae contains osteocytes. Now, if you move to the central portion, of a bone, somewhere in here, right in the middle, this is where you are going to find spongy bone. Somewhere in the middle, you're going to find spongy bone. So over here, that will be spongy bone. That will be spongy bone. Then we have some additional structures. So these are called the Volkmann's canal. These are called the Volkmann canal. So an additional structure you're going to see, you will see the Volkmann canal. The Volkmann canal, their duty is to they connect blood blood vessels and nerves between the surface of the bone and the interior of the bone. So we have the Volkmann canal. So we have blood vessels and nerves on the surface of the bone. We also have blood vessels and nerves inside the bone, but they need to be connected together. So that is the job of the Volkmann's canal. Job of the Volkmann canal. Sometimes it is also called the they are also called the perforating canals. So the perforating canals or the Volkmann canals, they make sure that there is continuity between the blood vessels and nerves on the surface of the bone and the blood vessels and nerves that are inside the bone. All right. So structurally, we are done with bones. Now let's look at the chemical composition of bones. Look at the chemical composition of bones. Chemical composition of bones. So we have, we'll start with the first one. Let's look at the organic components. Organic components of bone. We have cells and osteoid. So we have two main forms of organic bone components. We have the cells and then we have the osteoids. Now for the cells, we have three groups of cells. Number one, we have the osteoblasts. Number two, we have the osteocytes. And number three, we have the osteoclasts. Now I'm putting an arrow here. The osteoblasts, they are immature bone cells that eventually mature to the osteocytes. So the osteocytes are mature bone cells. The osteoblasts are immature bone cells. So the osteoblasts eventually they will mature or develop to the osteocytes. Osteoclasts. These are the bones that they break down matrix. They break down bone matrix. The osteoclasts. These are cells that they break down bone matrix. Why do they have to break down bone? They break down bone to release. They break down bone to release calcium ions. That's a 2+ there. So they break down bones to release calcium ions. So remember, we have said that minerals are stored in bones. The major mineral that is stored in bones is calcium ions. So sometimes your body needs these calcium ions. For your body to get these calcium ions, the bone has to be broken down. That is the function of the osteoclast. So let's see very quickly. So these bones, so these cells, they break down bone and they release calcium ions. What is the function of these calcium ions? Function. So function of calcium ions released. Number one, is required for the functioning of the nervous system and the muscular system. So the calcium ion that is released, it is required for the functioning of the nervous system and the muscular system. They need calcium ion for them to be able to function. Number two, blood coagulation. Number 2, blood coagulation. So blood coagulation, it prevents or it stops blood from bleeding. So if you had a case where somebody bleeds, somebody had a wound and they bleed continuously, it could be that they lack calcium. They lack calcium as one of the elements they're supposed to have that can actually help with the clotting process. Number 3, secretions. Secretions. Gland cells and nerve cells. So gland cells and nerve cells, they secrete chemicals that are required for their functioning. They secrete chemicals that are required for their functioning. For the nerve cells, we will see that in this class. For the gland cells, you will see that in AMP2. So secretions is another function of the calcium ions. So calcium ions are required for secretions. Number 4, cell division. By now, we already know that there are 2 types of cell division in the human body. We have mitotic cell division and we have meiotic cell division. And we know the functions of each of those types of cell division in the human body. But those cell divisions will not take place if calcium ions are not present. Right, so we are done with the, we are still under organic components of bone. We said we had cells and then we had the osteoid. So we are done with the cells now. We'll go ahead now and look at the osteoid. Osteoid. Now, the osteoid is the ground substance. The osteoid is the ground substance and it contains the collagen fibers. It contains the collagen fibers. So, what is the importance of the osteoid? So it provides bones with flexibility and strength. So the osteoid, it is the ground substance that contains the fibers. Of what importance is this to the bones? It provides bones with flexibility and strength. So we are done with the organic components, the cells and the osteoid. Now we are going to move to the inorganic components. Inorganic components. So inorganic components of bone. Now these inorganic components, they make up 65% of bone mass. So 65% of bone mass is made up of inorganic components. And these inorganic components, they are in the form of mineral salts. They are in the form of mineral salts. And the mineral salts precisely is calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate. Calcium phosphate. The chemical formula for calcium phosphate is this. So the main mineral that you find in bones is calcium phosphate. Now, why is it that bones require calcium phosphate? So this calcium phosphate, it provides the bones with hardness. So bones are hard because of this mineral salts that they have. Number two, resist compression. So bones are also capable of resisting compression. So you cannot take a bone and then you squeeze it to change its shape as you do with a balloon, which means that bones, they resist compression, and the reason for that is because their bones are actually made up of minerals. All right, good. Now, when you did tissues or histology, cartilage was described as soft bone, and then we had bone proper, which is called osseous tissue. So and they are all connective tissue. So why is it that bones are harder than cartilages? Why is it that bones are harder than cartilages? So bones are harder than cartilages for two reasons. Number one, bones are mineralized with calcium phosphate. So bones are mineralized with calcium phosphate. Number two, bones have additional collagen fibers. Bones have additional collagen fibers. So these are the two reasons why bone is harder than cartilage. Bones are mineralized, and bones also have additional collagen fibers. All right. Next, we'll look at the growth of bone after a child has been delivered. So we call that postnatal bone growth. Postnatal bone growth. 1. Increase in length. So how does a bone increase in length? This takes place in the growth zone or the epiphyseal plate. If you go back to the rough diagram I put on the board earlier on, you should be able to see where this takes place. Now, here, so how does the bone grow from there? You have a rapid increase in chondrocytes. So the cells that are found in this area, they are called chondrocytes. So there is a rapid growth of these cells called the chondrocytes, and when this happens, then the bone actually increases in length. Now, as you are aware, your bones cannot continue growing forever, right? So we have the process called calcification or ossification. Calcification or ossification. Now, when this happens, it replaces the cartilages. It replaces cartilage. So, at the end of long bones, we have cartilage. At the end of long bones, we have cartilage. And as you remember, the cells chondrocytes, they are associated with cartilage, not with bone. So at the end of long bones, we have cartilage. This is where bone growth occurs. Now, but eventually, this cartilage here, it will have to be replaced by bone proper. That process is called calcification or ossification. Now, if it is called calcification because it is the addition of calcium phosphate. Now, when it's called ossification, ossification means the hardening, making it hard. So these two terminologies, they go together. All right, so this is how a bone actually increases in length. There is growth at the growth zone due to the chondrocytes. But when this growth has to end, then there's going to be calcification. The cartilage in the ends of those bones has to be transformed to bone proper, and then the growth will actually end. That process is called calcification or ossification. Good. Now, so this is how bone increases in length. But how does bone increase in width? So for bone to increase in width, so let's do something like this nature. So let's say this is your bone right over here, and somewhere here, this is your periosteum. So increase, this will be B now, this will be B. Increase in width. So for your bone to increase in width, there's going to be deposition of matrix, of bone matrix just beneath the periosteum. So this is your periosteum right here. Somewhere underneath here, you are going to deposit matrix. So it is the deposition of matrix here just beneath the periosteum that will make bones to increase in their width. Make bones to increase in their width. So and this process is called appositioning. That process is called appositioning. So it means that width growth So growth in width will be called appositional growth. So growth in width will be called appositional growth. Appositional growth. All right, let's proceed. So we know that bones grow and bones stop growing. Hormones are involved. So bones grow and bones they stop growing. Bones they grow, but bones also they stop growing. So normally our bones they stop growing when we are age 18. The bones they stop growing. So hormones are involved. Hormones are involved. So for an increase, so for bones to grow 1, 2, 3, we have the growth hormone, which is assisted by the thyroid hormone. Thyroid hormone. So for bones to grow, we need the growth hormone assisted by the thyroid hormone. So I have growth hormone plus thyroid hormone. Then we also need testosterone and estrogen. So testosterone is normally called the male hormone produced by males, estrogen produced by females. So these three hormones are required for bone growth. These three hormones are required for bone growth. So these three hormones, they stimulate the epiphyseal plate or the growth zone so that the chondrocytes can divide. Now, how about, because after age 18, we stop growing, we stop getting taller after age 18. So which hormones are associated with the stoppage of bone growth? Two main hormones. We have the testosterone again, and the estrogen. They close the epiphyseal plate. So for our bones to stop growing, two hormones are required, testosterone and estrogen. So what do? They close the epiphyseal plate. And once as they close the epiphyseal plate, then bones will stop growing. All right. Let's quickly look at some homeostatic imbalances of bone. Homeostatic imbalances of bone. Homeostatic imbalances of bone. Number one, we have inadequate mineralization. So remember we said the mineral salt, the mineral salt which is dominant in bones is calcium phosphate. So you may have a condition where you do not have enough calcium phosphate in your system. So now in adults, this condition is called osteomalacia. In adults, this is called osteomalacia. So this is for adults. Now in children, this is called rickets. In children, this is called rickets. But for children, rickets will require an additional condition. So it's going to be plus vitamin D deficiency. So for a child to suffer from rickets, the condition is called rickets, the child's bones are going to be inadequately mineralized, plus the child will also be suffering from vitamin D deficiency. For adults, the condition called osteomalacia in adults, it is when the bones are inadequately mineralized. That's condition number one. Condition number two, osteoporosis. We are still under homeostatic imbalances. Condition number two, osteoporosis. Osteoporosis. So this has to do with excessive breakdown of bone matrix. Excessive breakdown of bone matrix, or just simply bone breakdown exceeds bone formation. Just simply put, bone breakdown exceeds bone formation. When this happens, bones become more porous. The bones become more porous. When you say bones become more porous, what does that mean? It means that we have more spongy bone and less compact bone. It means that your bone has more, we have more spongy bone and less compact bone. I'll put a small diagram here to try and explain that. So normal bone should be like this. So in here, that's spongy bone. That's spongy bone. Out here, that's compact bone. Now in the case of osteoporosis, what we'll end up having will be something like this. Now this might be a little bit of an exaggeration for explanatory purposes only. So here we have spongy bone, and here we have compact bone. So this is a case for osteoporosis, and this is a case for a normal bone. Now, if your bone has a larger proportion of spongy bone, this bone can fracture easily. Bones with a higher proportion of spongy bone, they fracture easily. Bones with a higher proportion of compact bone, they are resistant to fracturing. They are resistant to fracturing. Now, in women, osteoporosis is related to estrogen. In women, osteoporosis is related to estrogen. What does that mean? If a woman is still producing the normal levels of estrogen, then the system fights osteoporosis. If a woman does not produce the normal estrogen levels, then osteoporosis actually sets in. That's why women who are at their menopausal stages, they suffer very easily from osteoporosis, as opposed to women who have not reached their menopausal stages in life. All right. Okay. So we've determined that hormones play a role in osteoporosis. But what else can play a role in osteoporosis? Let's see additional factors. Let's look at some contributory factors. Contributory factors. Which other factors contribute to osteoporosis aside the hormonal aspect of it? We have petite body form. Petite body form. Petite body form, immobility if you do not exercise, a diet. So we have calcium ions and vitamin D. Poor diet. We have calcium ion and vitamin D. Poor diet. That could be contributed as well. And then the fourth one is smoking. So smoking also can contribute to osteoporosis. But the main one is the hormonal relationship. These ones, they are contributory, in other words, they are secondary. The main one is the hormonal aspect of it. All right. The third homeostatic imbalance of bone is Paget's disease. So number 3 is Paget's disease. So number 3 is Paget's disease. So how does this come about? It is a disruption of the replacement of old bone tissue with new bone tissue. Disruption of the replacement of old bone tissue with new bone tissue. So all the time, If your bones are healthy, old bone tissues are always being replaced by new bone tissue. But if you are suffering from Paget's disease, then this particular biological process is disrupted. And when this process is disrupted, then your bones become fragile. So this will lead to what? It leads to what? Your bones are fragile, which means that they can break easily or they can fracture very easily. And your bones are deformed. So your bones do not have the normal shape. Your bones become fragile and your bones become deformed. So those are the characteristics of Paget's disease. Okay, so that's the end of our lecture on bones. Thank you very much.